Hello students, you are welcome in my online teaching classes. I am Shishpal Chauhan and I have brought for you the summary of the chapter from 7 to 10, The Invisible Man, for class 12 students. So I'll just read the summary at fast speed and you will keep on understanding the main points. Those are covered in this summary. Okay, let's begin. We know that in the chapter 6, the furniture in Mrs. Hall's inn behaved strangely and was very much disturbed at the strange event. She was very much disturbed at this strange event. The next day, she didn't take breakfast for the invisible man, and he had been waiting for that. He was sitting in the parlor and kept waiting for breakfast up to nearly midday. He rang the bell thrice, but no one came there. The news about the burglary in Mr. Bunting's study had spread like a wildfire in the town. People had started coming there in the inn in twos. Mr. Hall, the spelling you may correct of in twos. Mr. Hall, along with Mr. Wadgers, had gone to take advice of Mr. Shuckleforth, the magistrate. The stranger was both upset and angry, so he went out his anger by shouting curses, tearing paper, and smashing bottles. It was Whit Monday, so all were in their new dresses and in a mood of celebration. Several young boys also gathered there. The writer describes their dress also. As the blinds of the parlor were down, the boys were trying to peep into the room from here and there. The invisible man was shouting at them. He had broken half a dozen of bottles. Till then, a pungent smell of the chemical was spread there. After that, he uttered, "Mrs. Hall," loudly, and Mrs. Hall appeared after some time with a tray in her hands. She also produced a bill to him. He complained about the delay in preparing his meal and also as to why he didn't receive any response to the repeatedly ringing of the bell. In this way, arguments were exchanged between them. Mrs. Hall was in angry mood and she asked him as to why he had not paid the bill. She told him that he had no right of grumbling because he was not paying his bill on time. Hall also indirectly mentioned to him about the coins he had found. It made him angrier and he stamped his foot to vent out his anger. She also wished to know from him as to what he had been doing in her chair upstairs and how he could appear in an empty room without using the door. After that he became violent. He removed his false nose and put it in Mrs. Hall's hand. As she saw what she had taken, she screamed and threw it down in fear. After that, he removed everything he was wearing on his face and head. Now he had become a headless man. Mrs. Hall moved quickly towards the door to go out. The people who stood there were also petrified and they also started moving out. More people from the village also came there after listening to the shouting and shrieks. There was a chaos in the coach and horses. After that, people ran here and there in panic, tumbling on each other. The people stood here and there making their own stories about the unusual event. In the meantime, a group of people, including Mr. Hall, Mr. Bobby Jeffers, Jaffers, the village constable, Mr. Wadgers reached there. Mr. Hall opened the door forcefully and told Mr. Jaffers to arrest the invisible man. They saw the headless figure in front of them in darkness. He was having a half-eaten piece of bread in one gloved hand and a piece of cheese in the other. He warned Mr. Jaffers against his arrest. When he found the situation dangerous for him, the stranger threw down the piece of bread and cheese aside to face the situation. Pending, Mr. Hall grasped the knife that was lying on the table in his own defense. Pending is no word here. Mr. Hall grasped the knife that was lying on the table in his own defense. Then the stranger threw the removed glove at Jaffar's face, and he also reacted quickly to grip the stranger's handless wrist. He also caught his invisible throat. In this way, a fight in which Mr. Hall, Jeffers, Mr. Wedgers, and some others were involved began in the inn Coach and Horses. They were clutching and hitting each other. Then they fell on a chair that came in their way, and it was crashed. The scuffle continued till the stranger cried all of a sudden, saying, "I'll surrender," although he was successful in keeping Jeffers down. Leaving him down, he stood up abruptly, panting. He was looking a strange figure, headless and handless, as he had pulled off the right as well as his left glove. In the meantime, Jeffers also stood up and produced a pair of handcuffs. But the stranger started undoing buttons of his waistcoat, and soon his clothes seemed to be hanging in the air, showing empty space in them. In a way, he was under the process of becoming completely invisible. The stranger pleaded to Jeffers that he was ready to surrender and he should not handcuff him. But the constable didn't accede to his request. In the meantime, the stranger was in the process of making himself invisible by removing his clothes and bandages one by one. After that, he sprang up again and flung off his coat. Suddenly realizing what was happening, Jaffer said, "Here, stop that," and gripped at the waistcoat and struggled to keep a tight hold on him, but the shirt slipped out of his hold. Then he instructed others to hold him and told them that if he was able to remove his clothes, he would become invisible. Everyone present there was crying, "Hold him!" Only a fluttering white shirt in the air was visible to the crowd. Then the shirt sleeve planted a blow in Mr. Hall's face and stopped him from stepping forward. Within the next moment, the stranger was completely invisible, and the people present there were crying, "Hold him, shut the door, don't let him loose. I got him, I got something, here it is." It seemed that everybody was being hit by the invisible man at that time. Then Sandy Wedgers might have thought to save the people from being hit by an invisible figure, so he opened the door. People started rushing out of the room, making a jam-like situation at the door. Then the extraordinary conflict reached the house door and also went down the steps of the inn. Jeffers cried in a voice as if his throat was strangled, but he kept his hold on the invisible man very tight. He also kept his knees playing so as to hit the person in his grip, but at last fell down on the gravel with his head downward. Then his fingers relaxed and the tie on the invisible person was loosened. Next, a scream that came halfway across the road was heard. It was a woman who had been hit by somebody while she was crossing the road. Then a dog was kicked and it yelped and then ran growling into Huckster's yard, and with that the transit of the invisible man was completed. For some time the people stood there amazed and kept gesticulating. After that they scattered away as a gust scatters the dead leaves. But Jeffers lay there on the gravel quite motionless, with face upward and knees bent. Now chapter 8, in transit. This chapter introduces us to another character named Gibbons, who is an amateur naturalist of the district. He was lying in the open space at the hill slope, quite lost in his thoughts. He was almost in dozing state, and suddenly he heard some sound as that of a man who was coughing, sneezing, and then swearing in a wild manner. Gibbons looked here and there to confirm as to who was there, but found none. But still he was able to hear very attentively swearing by a man. The pitch of voice was growing to a height, decreased to a lower level, and then suddenly died down at a distance. It seemed to him that the sound was going in a direction of Adlerdean, then it was raised up due to sneeze and ended. Gibbon's peace of mind was disturbed by that unusual occurrence that he experienced. He stood up at once and quickly moved towards the steepness of the hill that led him to the village. He did so as fast as he could. He did it fast. Okay, you can say that. Now, chapter 9. In this chapter, we meet a new character named Thomas Marvel, who also plays an important role in pushing the events of the novel forward. He was a short-statured person whose cylindrical nose was protruding. He seemed to be a lazy type of person who wore a furry silk hat. Mr. Thomas Marvel was sitting with his feet dangling in a ditch by the roadside, just a mile and a half out of the village Iping. He was barefooted and his toes were broad. He was thinking about a pair of shoes which he had got in charity, and those were too large for him, yet they were the soundest boots he ever had got. He also compares this pair of shoes to the ones he had previously worn. Those were very comfortable in dry weather, but they were too thin for dampness, you can say damp weather. He was unable to reach the conclusion as to which pair of shoes was more comfortable. Then suddenly it occurred to him that both the pairs were ugly to see. In the meantime, he heard a voice from behind saying, "They are boots anyhow." It was the voice of the invisible man who needed an assistant for help. He needed a person who could help him arrange for his clothes, carry the load of his books, and manage for his shelter. Thomas Marvel was a suitable person for him because he was timid, coward by nature, and somewhat foolish also. When he heard the voice coming from some distance, he does not believe and keeps on conversing with himself. But when the voice comes nearer and keeps on giving responses, he dares the voice to come before him in flesh and blood. Finding no reply, he again asked the voice if he was a dead person. No answer came, and Mr. Thomas remained standing there without boots and feeling quite amazed. Mr. Thomas Marvel uttered to himself that he might be under the influence of drink. After that, the invisible man suddenly caught him by the collar and shook him violently and advised him not to be foolish. But Mr. Marvel thought that it was all done by some bad spirit that might be haunting that place. He also blamed the pair of shoes he was trying to wear for the bad experience he had had at that time. The invisible man tried to convince him that he was a man in flesh and blood, had become invisible with the help of some drug, but Marvel was not convinced. After that, the invisible man started throwing pieces of stone at him to force Marvel to accept that the other person was a man in reality. After some time, Marvel had to believe. Then the invisible man told Mr. Marvel that he needed his help. He indirectly bullied Marvel of using his power if ever he tried to cheat him. In this way, the invisible man found an assistant. Now, chapter 10. In this chapter, we come to know that the people in Iping village became busy in enjoying the festivities on the Whit Monday. Iping was decorated with buntings and everybody was in gala dress. No doubt there was a slight uneasy calm in the air, but people were able to conceal their qualms. There were several types of swings for the children and the adolescents. After some time, a stranger who was Thomas Marvel and whom the people of Iping mistook for the invisible man appeared at about 4 o'clock from the direction of the downs. He was moving with reluctant steps and turned to the corner of the church and then moved straight to the way leading to the coach and horses. The stranger seemed to be talking to himself and stopped at the front of, in the front of, you can say, in the front of the coach and horses, at the front of the coach and horses steps. According to Mr. Huxter's report, that person had to undergo a severe mental struggle before entering the inn. Actually, he had come to steal the invisible man's clothes and books from his room. The invisible man was afraid to go there because the people of Iping were alert and they were prepared to catch him at any cost since he had been able to escape from them. So he took Marvel's help. He was also with him to give him a cover in case of some eventuality. After some time, Mr. Marvel appeared with a bundle in a blue cloth in one hand and 3 books tied together in the other. Huxter cried to stop the thief and also ran after him. Mr. Huxter had hardly gone a few steps forward in the direction where Mr. Marvel had gone when his leg was caught by someone invisible. He was no longer running now, but flying through the air. Then suddenly he saw the ground just very close to his face. So this is the end of the chapter 10. After some time, I'll come before you and present chapter 11 onwards. Till then, have a nice day. Thank you.